Hey guys, for this lecture video that I'm going to be filming, you need to have already read the prompt that was listed above this video. It's called Abigail Adams' letter. You need to read through the prompt part of it and the actual passage itself, because I'm not going to be reading the whole thing and you're going to want some knowledge before you get into this. So if you haven't done that yet, stop the video, read the prompt, and then come back here. Okay, so you practice doing soapstones. Again, I'm hoping that was just a good review and nothing was surprising about that. This little prompt that we got in 2014 offered quite a rich setting, context for doing soapstones. It says in the following letter, Abigail Adams writes to her son, John Quincy Adams, who is traveling abroad with his father, John Adams. And you look at the date and it's 1780, so then we know it was shortly after the Revolutionary War. And you know about the Revolutionary War from history class. You know that John Adams, the part that he and Abigail Adams played in that war. And so this gives you so much context going into this piece right here. So when you first get a prompt, just make sure that you are looking at that date. Make sure you're looking at those figures. If there are people that you don't recognize, like Florence Kelley, I didn't know who Florence Kelley was. I should have known because she's actually quite famous, but I didn't before I saw that prompt. And so you have to do some speculation, but you can speculate based on sort of what's going on at the time. In that last prompt that I gave you from Florence Kelley, it's turn of the century, industrial revolution is sort of amping up. There are labor issues that are becoming more prominent, but also at the same time, there's women's suffrage, and that is essential to understand about that passage. It's kind of a sneaky little passage. Partly it's about child labor, right? But by the end of it, you realize it is about something a little bit different, right? Here she is talking about women being able to vote. That's how we will solve child labor. So she like pulls at your heartstrings with the kid stuff, and then she starts to get into like the voting stuff, you know? Okay, but let's get back to Abigail Adams here. One thing we are going to be talking about here is that when you're writing your rhetorical analysis essays, you want to pay attention not just to the details of each sentence, which you guys have done so well throughout this year. You also want to be paying attention to the overall structure of it, right? And we've been talking about this a lot with argument, and I've been sort of forcing you to think about how the different pieces of your argument all add up slowly into one complete thing. And anytime the AP test is going to give us these passages that it thinks are some of the greatest pieces of rhetoric of all time, you can be assured that the writer was paying attention to overall structure. So we're going to talk here about the beginning of the letter, the middle of the letter, and the end of the letter, and how she kind of shifts between topics and between rhetorical strategies to create this very effective piece of rhetoric. So you look at the beginning here, and this is kind of her like sorry not sorry section of the letter. You can tell that her son was reluctant to go on this trip, didn't want to go to France. Maybe if we look a little bit later in the letter, we can see that she's saying that it's because he wants his leisure time. Like, oh, you're a lazy kid, and so you didn't want to go into France because you knew it would be hard. But basically, she's like, look, I knew that you didn't want to go, but I am hoping that you're glad you went now. And she does this in a kind of a tricky way. It's like she's acknowledging the counter argument here. She's acknowledging that he had his own feelings at the same time as she is reminding him of his youth, right? He's saying kind of, she keeps referencing sort of like in the future, you're going to feel a certain way, right? So at the beginning here, she's like, I understand how you felt in the past. I'm hoping you feel a certain way presently like this, presently right now, that you feel better about your trip. But what you don't understand, here it says, you will find your understanding opening and daily improving. So she gives him a little bit of a timeline and suggests to him, look, I'm older and I know better than you, and so I'm very proud of you for submitting to my advice. And I think that key word submitting here is really important. When you submit to something, you still stay a little bit reluctant. You're not fully won over to the cause. It's not like you're agreeing with the person ultimately. Instead, you are submitting. So you're saying, okay, I am going to, either you have so much power over me or I trust you enough that I am going to do what you say, whether or not I agree with it. And she's saying, I'm proud of you for doing this thing because you will see rewards in the future. So she's kind of making this oblique reference to her age as somebody who knows what's going to happen in the future, based on past experience, right? And then also to his age by saying, I am your parent. You needed to submit to me. And you will have good results from it, even if you don't understand that now because you are young. So this whole first section, I think there are a lot of subtle references to age and her position of authority over her son. So it's like, that's why I say sorry, not sorry. It's a bit of an apology. She's like, because she adjusts that counter argument by saying like, look, I knew you didn't want to go. I'm sorry you didn't want to go, but I'm not sorry that I urged you to go. Of course, in your papers, you would not want to say sorry, not sorry. You would probably use the phrase a subtle reference to her parental authority over him, but that's, I don't know, it makes it clear to me. Okay, what I'm calling the middle section is from some author all the way until unborn. This is the section that is full of metaphors and references. The first metaphor about the traveler to a river. Okay, so some author that I've met with compares a judicious traveler to a river that increases its stream the further it flows from its source, or to certain springs which, running through rich veins of minerals, improve their qualities as they pass along. That's a great little metaphor there. You could spend a whole paragraph talking about that metaphor, but I think what works maybe a little bit better is looking at the way that this whole section is devoted to metaphor. That somebody could be roused, kindled, and inflamed. Let's see, there's some others as well. Okay, I would have sworn. There we go. Wisdom and penetration are the fruit of experience. There's all of these kind of natural metaphors in this section. And I think that what happens there, so, oh, there it is, the fruit of experience. Sorry. Did I already say that one? I'm losing track. I get very nervous on these little videos. Anyway, so what she's talking about here are these natural metaphors that it's almost like it's inevitable that somebody grows from travel. It's inevitable that you will kind of like submit, again, that word submit, to the powers of nature, because this is the way that the natural world works and you are part of the natural world. So you are like a river that gets bigger. You are like somebody who like a piece of fruit that ripens through travel. You are also like somebody who, when you are put under pressure, might be kindled and inflamed, but then will grow more powerful. There's all these kind of like references to nature in this section. And I think what she is doing here is she's showing how there are all these different examples, both metaphorical and historical, that show that people who have been put under pressure and made uncomfortable rise to the occasion and become better because of it. Now, I want to caution you here. If you don't know who Cicero is, then you would not want to write about him in your essay. I had a lot of people when they wrote this essay that were like, Abigail Adams references Cicero, which shows that she knows who Cicero is. And this shows that she's very smart and has authority. Someone with a classical education like Abigail Adams has would know who Cicero is. And it is not impressive that she knows who Cicero is, and it would not be impressive to her son. What is impressive is the way that she's using Cicero to back up her argument, right? So if you don't know who Cicero is, then it is not going to add anything to the argument to talk about that as a reference. Yes, it's a rhetorical strategy she uses. She does reference Cicero as a rhetorical strategy, right? But if you don't know who he is, you're not going to be able to say why that is effective or not. So skip it. Go to something you know a little bit about, and that is where she talks about the Revolutionary War. War, tyranny, and desolations are the scourges of the Almighty, and ought no doubt to be deprecated. Yet it is your lot, my son, to be an eyewitness of these calamities in your own native land, and at the same time to owe your existence among a people who have made a glorious defense of their invaded liberties. La la la. Here she is talking about the American Revolution, which you do know about because you took history class, and she's talking about the French Revolution. No, she's talking about the French aiding the United States, right? And you know about that from history class. So think more about that reference. Unless you know about Cicero and Mark Antony and all that, then go for it. But if you don't, then rely on the knowledge that you already have and talk about how this reference is making her middle section stronger. It is no longer, in this section, no, she is no longer talking about her authority over her son. She is talking about historical events, authority over argument. Basically, she's saying that historical events have proven this argument to be true. So if you're not going to trust me, and she doesn't say this, but like you don't have to just trust me. You can also trust what we have learned from history. So that's sort of what she does in this middle section, and then by the end, she gets back to her own authority. Right in this last section, she talks about how it's great that you respect your elders. You have a parent that has taken so large and active a share in this contest and discharged the trust reposed in him with so much satisfaction as to be honored with the important embassy which at present calls him abroad. So basically she's like, listen here, you little brat, you are way lucky and you don't fully understand how lucky you are to have this place in history, but I understand as your mother. So you need to obey your father and recognize how grateful you should be for your father. And basically what she's saying is like, my argument has done its job up until now. I've acknowledged your point of view. I've shut it down with references and metaphors. And now you should know that now that you believe that it's good for you, you should thank me and you should make me proud over there. And then she says, basically, I trust you though. Right? It's like, it gives me pleasing hopes that she will not swerve from her dictates. Like, don't worry, I know you're a good kid, so I know you're going to follow my advice. And this is in a letter, of course. So she isn't having this conversation with him where she can kind of see his response. So she has to build this very carefully designed rhetoric in order to get to this last point where she says, okay, now that you've heard me out, now I trust you. So if you were talking about the structure of this essay overall, you could talk about it in those ways. Addressing a counterargument, but proving her own authority. Showing some evidence for that authority through references and metaphors. And then at the end, going back to her sort of trust in him and her love of her son. She uses this particularly your ever affectionate mother, like really laying it on thick, like I'm your mother and I love you so much, so I know you're going to make the right decision, right? And if you wanted to think about this in the traditional rhetorical triangle, you have ethos, logos, and pathos working very strongly through the whole thing. Ethos at the beginning, showing that I acknowledge you, I'm listening to you. That's a kind of way of building your credibility, but also I'm your mother, credible. Logos, here are all the reasons. Pathos, here's the emotional kind of justification for what I'm saying to you. And I wouldn't put that in your thesis. I wouldn't say she uses ethos, logos, and pathos to make her argument. But if you keep in mind that the paper is divided into these kind of sections, just the way that you divide papers in your arguments, then you can kind of proceed through your rhetorical analysis into kind of order that's going to make sense to people. As you are talking about the specific language choices that she's making in the beginning, you can also talk about the appropriateness of putting those in the beginning of the essay rather than at the end of the essay, letter. That she's using those in the beginning is more appropriate for her cause and is going to be more persuasive for her cause. Okay, so now you are going to do this with your Florence Kelly prompts. So that's all for this video, and now go to the next part of the module.